Hey everyone, and happy deadline day in FPL. It is a pleasure to be back with you once again, and of course we have to live stream on the deadline day. Unfortunately, I can't do it as a deadline stream because I am going off to FPL Fest and FPL meets before that in London. So if you're around for that later, it would be great to see you. In the meantime though, we've got some decisions to make, and I'm trying to get my team locked in before I head off on the train to London and start drinking, to be quite frank, because decisions are going to get a little bit foggy towards the end. So hopefully today, not only will I be able to figure out what my team is going to look like come the deadline, but also help you out in the chat as well. So importantly, if you've got any questions, I'm sure you do, I'm sure you've got loads of questions, please do put them in the chat, and as we go through the stream, I'll answer as many as possible, if not all of them. I don't think too many people are going to be watching this stream live, so if you are one of those people, it's very likely that I'll be able to answer your question. Obviously, the more complicated the question, the more difficult it is going to be to answer it, but I'll try my absolute best to do so, and I'll try not to sit on the fence wherever possible either. In the meantime though, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. First of all, if you subscribe, you can put your questions in the chat. If you like it, then more people can see it as well, and that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Thank you again for all the support in pre-season, by the way. It's been absolutely incredible. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully I can repay the favour today by answering as many of your questions as possible. I can already see a couple of you in the chat, but for now, let's move over to what my team is looking like, just to kick us off with a few different questions to start off. So this is where I'm at the moment. Now, I have talked about it in draft videos, and I have actually settled on this for the last, I think, 24, maybe even 48 hours, which is quite a long stretch for me, especially the amount of tinkering I've been doing and the amount of different videos, content I've been consuming over the last few days. But this is where I've landed at the moment. By the way, hi in the chat. I'll try and be very active in the chat today. So Manon, thank you so much for joining. Appinator as well. Sorry if I've mispronounced that. Ollie too, and Double Pivot. Veteran, hey, good to see you. Let me know if you're going to be around later at meets or at Fest as well. That would be great if you are. So overall, first question, what do you think of the team? That is a good opener. It is, I think, fairly balanced. It obviously only has Haaland, no Salah. That is the first poll question in the chat today. Where are you going with your premiums? Are you going Haaland only? Are you going Salah only? Are you going both? I've seen even a couple of drafts with neither, that outside of the fact that they don't have any premiums, look absolutely incredible. So I think there are different ways to play this game and different ways that could be successful. I don't know if you use FPL Review or Hub or anything like that to look at AI team ratings, but basically they're all coming out fairly level. So I think there are different ways to play and different ways to be successful in the first few game weeks, which is great to see. I'm currently looking at a Haaland only draft. Until fairly recently, I had Salah in there as well. But as soon as I started toying around with that extra 2.5 million I got from downgrading Salah to Saka, I started to really like the look of the depth of the side. And one of my key goals at the moment in the first 4 or 5 game weeks is to try to reduce as many planned transfers as possible, and having that extra bench spot and that 8th strong attacker, or strongish anyway, gives me just that little bit more depth, and it means that if injury strikes, I can rely on my bench just that little bit more. A similar kind of logic has been used with my 3rd defender spot. So I did have Munoz at Palace instead of Hall, and I did have a 2nd 4.0 instead of Robinson. That would have been Harwood Bellis. Just someone on the bench willing to burn him and just leave him on the bench most weeks. So the reason I've gone against that one in particular is, first and foremost, looking at the rotation between Hall and Robinson, they go together really well. So there are weeks that Robinson, probably not the best to start away at Man United. You'd expect United to score. Hall, great home game against Southampton, for example. But if Hall were to become a risk for minutes later on down the line, then Robinson's pretty much as nailed as they get right now, and Fulham have great fixtures in general after game week 1 is out of the way. Also, looking at the combination, if I swap in and out those two players over the first 5 weeks, I'm actually expected to gain more points than Munoz. And it also gives me that extra bit of depth on the bench. If something were to go wrong, if rotation were to strike, then it's much more likely that I'd get good points out of whoever's on the bench, out of Hall or Robinson, than I would out of Harwood Bellis. And that is saying that as a Southampton fan as well. So I think that's fairly level-headed. So in the chat as well, going back, so Cam, good morning, mate. How's it going? What's your team looking like? Have you got any questions? If you do, let me know in the chat. I'll try and answer you as quickly as possible. Well-balanced team. Thank you so much, Veteran. I appreciate that. I am setting up for maybe a wild card in game week 6, although if things go well, because there are a couple of punts in here, then if those punts go well, then maybe I can hold off for a bit longer and gain a bit of team value and explosivity from these differential options. So Minte is probably the prime example here, but also maybe Diogo Jota, maybe Adam Armstrong, who knows, Barco could even keep his place for a bit longer than we're expecting as well. So overall, I like this draft. I think it gives me a nice balance, and if I go to... Let's see if I've got it in front of me. There we go. So if I have a look at the hub and going across the game weeks, first of all, it's predicting 96%, which I'm pretty happy about. That is good to see. Although you always take these things with a pinch of salt, right? They're AI team ratings. They're not going to be perfect. They're just dealing with the data we've got so far. So things will change, but it's a good starting point. So I do like that. Before I can continue, a couple of questions in the chat. So Minte to Brereton Diaz for the vibes, and it's perfect apparently. Thank you, Manon. I do like Brereton Diaz. I like him a lot, actually. I am very tempted to include him and maybe swap Brereton Diaz in for Minte, and therefore João Pedro comes in for Adam Armstrong. The reason I've got it in this combination is twofold. So number one, Adam Armstrong is on penalties, Brereton Diaz isn't. Obviously, if I flip it, João Pedro is most likely on penalties. But João Pedro now looks maybe slightly less likely to get good minutes than Adam Armstrong does. And it's very close on the expected points in the opening 5 or 6 game weeks anyway. Now it looks like they're bringing in Rutter as well from Leeds. I'm just maybe ever so slightly nervous about Pedro getting a random benching or a random 60-minute substitution, whereas with Armstrong, I think that's much less likely. So that's more of an X minutes play, but also holding on to a penalty taker. The second reason is, honestly, I just love Minte. I think he's absolutely fantastic. The data on FBref as well, if any of you use that, I would highly recommend looking at it. At Feyenoord last season, he was in 99th percentile for a lot of the key stats for a right winger. And although he didn't start a ton of games and didn't play 90 minutes in a lot of matches, his data when on the pitch was absolutely unbelievable. And if he's even a fraction of that player in the Premier League, I think at 5.5 million he's going to be one of the bargains of the season. So I'm willing to take a little bit of a risk on Minte, and it is a risk, but if I'm willing to use the wild card early to get out of it, it's, I think, a risk worth taking. So that's my logic for going Minte and Armstrong rather than Brereton Diaz and João Pedro, but that's not completely locked right now. And if for whatever reason it looks like João Pedro is more secure come the end of the day, come transfer deadline, game week 1 deadline, then maybe I could swap that back over. The other reason on Brereton Diaz that has come to light in the last few hours is that Southampton are very keen on Archer, who was at Sheffield United last season, obviously didn't do that great there, but I do rate him pretty highly, and he's only going to come in if it's a permanent deal and that he's probably going to be given relatively good minutes. I think for me, that doesn't necessarily make Brereton Diaz a bad pick, but what it does do is mean that he'll probably be playing out on the left wing more often than not when Archer gets integrated. I still think he'll be good at left wing, and I still think he'll be a good option with great underlying data, because at the end of the day, he's probably still playing across that front three. But in the matches against tougher opposition, we have been known to play 5 at the back, and therefore one of those 2 up top might miss out. So, or one of those 3 up top rather might miss out. Now, that might be Archer. Fair enough. It might even be Armstrong, although I think that is unlikely. But that also means that Brereton Diaz might be a slight minutes doubt in those systems once Archer comes into the fold. For this week and for the next few weeks, I don't think that's a problem. So I still like him as an option. I just think overall, Armstrong is so secure in that lineup that I back him higher than João Pedro's minutes, and I also back Minte for the upside in this combination. So anyway, I've rambled on about that for far too long. I apologise. Next question in the chat was, am I worried about the Eze transfer rumours? Yes. Yes, I am, to be quite frank. That is something I'll be keeping an eye on for the next few hours, and definitely keeping an eye on up until the deadline. I probably wasn't worried about it at all until Bob got injured at Man City, and now that injury has happened, even though it's not like for like, I can see them really wanting to strengthen across the board in that attacking position. I don't think Eze will play right wing for them or anything, but it might mean that Bernardo Silva is relied upon at right wing more often, and therefore they need to strengthen in the middle as well. So I think as a combination, that's possibly problematic, and Eze could be a target for them. He also potentially has a release clause, which means that it might happen very quickly. So with normal transfer rumours, you'd expect it to happen over a week or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and therefore I wouldn't be too worried about Eze. But if there's a release clause and they need him now, I am a little bit worried. So Eze is a player that, if he's at Palace come the deadline and if he looks secure, he's absolutely locked into my side, and I'm willing to take a gamble that after the game week 1 deadline finishes, that hopefully he stays at Crystal Palace. If there's any sort of strong rumour that like a clause has been activated by anyone but probably Man City in the next few hours, then I will probably downgrade him to Nkunku. I think that's probably the way I'd play it. And Nkunku, whilst the game week 1 fixture isn't great, I think he's a very, very solid option. He's probably my next best in terms of the players that I'd like to have in my midfield right now. And I am worried about not owning him. But I do think Eze on penalties, on set pieces is a stronger option overall, even with the rumour hanging over him. So hopefully that answers your question. But yeah, I am quite worried about it, and I will be looking at that come the deadline as well. So moving down the chat as well, team looks nicely balanced. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Maybe a few too many 5.5s. That is absolutely fair. I do have 3 not risky options because I think they'll be fairly secure in the opening few. At least Armstrong and Smith Rowe should be anyway. But I do understand that. I do understand that 5.5 options can often be maybe a little bit worrying. But what I've tried to do is balance out upside here. So Minte, for instance, with someone who's probably talismanic for his club. So Armstrong. So even if Minte, the punt on Minte doesn't work out as I want it to, at least I've got that extra bench option, that 8th attacker, that I don't need to panic transfer him out. Now, the other upside to having a couple of 5.5s is I'm hoping that at least one of them in midfield does really well for me, and if as long as one of them does well, then that's comfortable. And then if the other one fails or flops for whatever reason, then I can go across to Rodgers really, really easily, or even downgrade it to a 4.5 like Winks, or Elliot Anderson as well at Nottingham Forest, potentially. So all of these options, and Fabio Carvalho as well. So there are 5 million options that I can downgrade to if these punts don't work out the way that I want them to. And by the time I'll know that, Carvalho will be integrated. We'll know more about Rodgers' expected minutes as well. So I'll know which one to pick at that point. So it is a risk. It is one too many maybe for most people's likings, but it gives me that extra depth and it gives me choices, I think, that I can move across to and downgrade to later down the line when I've got more certainty as to which budget options are going to be the best for me, if that makes sense. But you might still disagree. That's just my logic at the moment. So Raya is another question that has been asked. So Raya for me is a player that's come in recently. I do like Henderson as a 4.5, and if I really do want that extra 1 million and I feel like I need it somewhere else, then that is probably the place I'm most likely to save it and just go with Henderson. However, the reason Raya's in for me at the moment is the digging I've done, the research I've done into the Arsenal defence recently. And actually, I can probably do it on screen now for you because I did it with Fantasy Football Hub. Now, don't feel like you have to do this by any means. It's just because I do have an affiliation. If you don't have this and you wanted to get it, only if you wanted to get it, there is a link in the description below where you can get 50% off. I get a little bit of a kickback, so obviously it's amazing for me. But honestly, do not worry whatsoever if you don't want to get it. This is the tool I use anyway. I really like it. But yeah, no pressure whatsoever. If you were going to get it, feel free to use the link in the description if you want to support me. But otherwise, not a problem. So looking at this ticker, so what I would do is go to data type teams, and then we'll go per appearance, and this is how I figured out that I wanted Raya. So across the season, home and away for Arsenal, their XGC per 90 was 0.8. That's the best in the league. Expected on average a clean sheet every other game, as you can see. Now, I thought what would be fun is to go to the opposition strength and just bring that all the way up to the toughest opposition. So 3 and 4. Now, once it loads, hopefully this shows what I found the other day, which is Arsenal's expected goals conceded per 90 actually marginally improves to 0.7 XGC per 90. So even away from home, oh sorry, I've gone home and away there, so let me go away only because that was a key part. So again, let's wait for this to load, but I'm pretty sure it's very, very similar. Oh, okay, so XGC per 90 defensive, not 3.1, is 0.9 XGC per 90 for the season, away from home against the best opposition. Now, the reason that's relevant is because Arsenal have 3 tough away fixtures that I was ignoring as potential clean sheets because it's Aston Villa, Tottenham and Man City away from home in the opening 5. Now, if I'm planning a game week 6 wildcard, it obviously makes sense to avoid that if you think they're not going to keep clean sheets in those games. But the data suggests if any team is going to keep a clean sheet against those types of opposition, it would be Arsenal. And they haven't really done anything to their back line that would make them a worse option in the opening 5 game weeks this season. They should be just as solid as the back as ever before. And therefore, I decided I wanted Arsenal coverage. Then the decision, if I go back to my team, was whether or not I wanted Arsenal coverage in my back 3 or I just wanted to upgrade my keeper. Now, the reason I've upgraded my keeper is because, 1, I don't love any of the keepers at the moment, and I think for a 1 million upgrade, it's some of the easiest points I can gain in the opening 5 fixtures. I think it was 2.8 points on average over my next favourite option, which was Henderson. So Raya comes in for that reason, but also if I was looking at any of the defenders, I really want Trent. I don't think having any Arsenal defender is wise ahead of Trent in my system. I do want Gvardiol as well. The underlying attacking data is really decent. In fact, it's better than all of the Arsenal defenders, and they've got 3 good potential clean sheets in the opening 5. So I want Gvardiol for clean sheets and attacking threat. And this combination of Hall and Robinson for just 9 million across 2 positions gives me depth and saves me money, and also is pretty good on the expected points too. So I think I'm pretty content with my back 5, and I don't want to spend any more money on it and go really mega big at the back. So that's why I decided Raya rather than any other keeper. Now, obviously, like I mentioned, I could still save that money, go Henderson. And one thing I was toying around with is maybe upgrading Jota to Bruno, for instance, who's great on the X minutes, on penalties, on set pieces, good underlying data, not great fixtures, but not bad fixtures. And I know a lot of analytical managers really favour Bruno in the opening few game weeks, whereas Jota, I think we'll come on to him later, but is definitely a risk for minutes, if not in game week 1, certainly down the line. So that could be a way of shoring up my midfield and giving me less questions down the line. However, as it stands, clearly I'm going with Raya from the start at the moment anyway. Back to the chat for a few questions. So BBD is inevitable. I can't help but agree. I think he'll get 25 goals this season. No, I think he'll tick over nicely. He'll get maybe, I would say, conservatively 8 or 9 goals, but I think the upside is there that he could get up to 15 if he really overperforms. I think a moderate estimate would be a 10 Premier League goal season and maybe 5 or 6 assists would be great for him and great for Southampton as well. If he gets that, he'll be great value at 5.5 million. And the data suggests that that is certainly within his capabilities based on the data at a very poor Sheffield United team last season. He was still getting 0.45 XG per 90. Very, very decent. So moving down, so I'd swap, so Veteran says I'd swap Armstrong for a 4.5 and upgrade the bench, or even keep more back for game week 2. Now that is something I considered. I think for me it's just the worry is that I do want a bit of depth, and if I downgrade the forward spot to a 4.5, then it's basically a player that's not going to get minutes. And if I go with that, it gives me less bench depth and less rotation options in the front 7. I won't have a strong front 8 basically, and any players that I bring off the bench would have to be defenders at that point. So I do agree that saving the 1 million there could be an option, and actually again it could give me that extra 1 million to upgrade Jota if I wanted to, or even upgrade Hall to a Porro for instance, or maybe even one of the 5.5 midfielders to Nkunku now I think about it. So there are options there, but I think overall I prefer the idea of that rotation combination of a Southampton option, a Brighton option, and a Fulham option who rotate really well 2 out of 3 every single week for the first 5. And that's why I've gone with that for now anyway. So Eze to Nkunku gives you Armstrong to Muniz. That's true. I could do that. And actually, that is an option. It does reduce a penalty taker for me though. And I do like Eze, as it reduces 2 penalty takers actually for me as well, because Eze also on penalties. If Eze were to have heavy rumours, then I probably would move Nkunku in, as I mentioned earlier, for Eze. And then I've got that 0.5 to play with. And then all of a sudden, Muniz might become more tempting for me over Armstrong. I think even without penalties, he's maybe a shade better as an option anyway. And he's got great fixtures too. So yeah, that I do quite like that as an option, but maybe only if those Eze rumours intensify. But very good point. So moving down, yeah, so going for the 5.5s means jumping on those budget bandwagons will be much easier. I completely agree. As I mentioned earlier, so that this chat is maybe a little bit delayed for me. I apologise. So Raya pick is bang on. He has Veteran has hope, Pope even, not hope. Hopefully he also has hope, but he's got Pope. I agree. I do like the Newcastle defence in the opening few game weeks. I think a lot of people are overlooking them from a defensive point of view, and I'll go back to the data here. I'll bring it back to the season data, home and away. I don't think they rank very well, but there's a massive asterisk there that Joe Linton was out for quite a considerable part of the season. As you can see, I think it was 1.6 XGC per 90 there. Expected a clean sheet. Oh, no, hang on, updating. 2.0 XGC per 90. Wow, that's not great. But that was with a lot of injuries. Joe Linton was out for a considerable part of the season, and they're going to have Tonali back in fairly soon as well. I think that'll shore them up too. And Pope. as well. Huge miss last season, and he is a great shot stopper. So overall, bringing back to the core point here that Pope is a good option, I do rate Newcastle defence, and I do think that they will be one of the sides that will considerably improve on this data from last season. So yeah, really like the shout. It's part of the reason that I've got Hall in my back line. Maybe there are questions in the chat later on about Hall, but Newcastle fans seem pretty adamant that he starts, and I do like his upside as well. He's got a bit of pedigree even at left wing in advanced positions, so I think he'll be very good at getting forward and getting those chances. Next question is, what are my thoughts on Solanke? Now, that's a really good question. I do really like Solanke. I think he'll be a phenomenal buy for Spurs. And if we go to, let's go to the fixture analyzer actually. So opening 6 game weeks, we'll keep it 6 game weeks because not everyone's going to be on a wild card game week 6 like me. 6 game weeks, we'll go from an attacking point of view as well actually whilst we're here. Spurs fixtures aren't the best. I think a lot of people are looking at Solanke and Porro as well, and maybe even Son, because of these first 2 game weeks, Leicester away and Everton at home. Now, Leicester away is obviously a prime fixture. Leicester have really struggled in pre-season. They've lost a couple of players. They've got a new manager in, new system. I think whichever way you look at it, Leicester are likely to probably struggle in the opening few game weeks. I might be wrong on that, but I think most people think that they're probably going to be struggling. Now, if they do, then Spurs even away from home in game week 1 is going to be a really good fixture for them. And looking at Solanke in isolation, I think it looks really likely he starts game week 1. And therefore, putting those 2 pieces together, game week 1, I think he could score really well. Now, the only, not issues, but the challenge for me is it's 2 million extra on what I'm already prepared to pay in that third forward slot. That obviously means that I have to make changes elsewhere. 1 million could come out of the keeper. 1 million could maybe come out somewhere else, maybe lose one of the 5.5 million midfielders, but then I've got less depth. And Solanke, whilst game week 1 is really good, game week 2, Everton's defence isn't terrible, even if it is at home. And then it's Newcastle away, tough place to go, and Arsenal at home, again, tough place. Sorry, not tough place to go, but tough team to take on. So I think overall, from an attacking point of view, there might be a better stretch of games that I can target for Solanke later on. And maybe, in my view, it's more wise to wait and see how he integrates, or wait for him to integrate, because I think it's inevitable he will integrate really well. Just whether or not that takes a 1 game week or 2 game weeks to get to that point might be the challenge here. I also think it's quite likely he comes off after 70, 75 minutes. Whether Richarlison comes in, I don't know. It looks like he's been in training, so he might get a couple of minutes at the end, or maybe even Kulusevski comes in as a false 9 for a few minutes as well. Now, I don't think that makes Solanke a bad pick by any means. I still really like him as an option. It's just whether or not Solanke is a good enough option to represent value over the 5.5 that I've already got there, who's on penalties. It looks like Solanke probably won't be. He could, but I think it's more likely that Son keeps him for now. I think he will fit the system really well. It's just whether or not it's immediate. And because the first fixture is the really good one, and there are maybe slight doubts over the first fixture in terms of how many minutes he's going to get, how well he'll integrate straight from the off, I think that's what's maybe steering me away from him for now. That being said, though, he is my thumbnail. I do really like him. I'm tempted to try and build a draft with him in it, but I can already kind of predict how that would look. And if I try and build it live with you here, so I'll bring in Solanke. He's not on the first page for whatever reason. Oh, right, yeah, his transfer suggestions, that's why. So I'm 2 million down. So how am I going to find that 2 million? Now, I could maybe downgrade Jota to Nkunku. I don't like that because I do want someone else representing this price point around 7.5 million because there are good options there, Gordon being one of them. So what I would probably want to do is downgrade Raya to Henderson. and then I've got to find a million. So again, it would probably be, okay, I can't take the upside gamble on Minte all of a sudden, and I put in Winks, lose a bit of bench depth. Let's make those transfers and optimize the team. So that brings in Smith Rowe. The team rating comes down a bit. Again, take that with a pinch of salt, but it comes down a little bit. I do like Solanke, but I think overall it hinders my team ever so slightly, where I've got a slightly worse keeper, I've got less bench depth, and I can't have that fun pick as the 8th attacker. And it means that if any rotation strikes, if any injuries occur, all of a sudden I'm going to need to make those transfers rather than rolling and just bringing on someone from my bench. Now, I have finished the poll on Haaland, Salah or both just now. Thank you for voting, by the way. 31 votes in there, which means at least 31 people tuned in, which is great. Haaland only comes out on top at 61%, just like myself, so that's nice confirmation bias, if nothing else. Salah only at 19%, so there are quite a few of you going with Salah only. Haaland and Salah 12%, which was me until a couple of days ago, and neither at 6%, which again is higher than maybe I expected. So let me know in the chat which you are and why that is at this point in time. Now, at this point in the chat, hopefully there are a few of you still watching. If you are, I've put a link in the description below to the Fantasy Content Awards. Now, if you're enjoying the stream, if you like what I do, then I'd really appreciate it if you could nominate me in the Fantasy Football Content Creators category there. Again, feel free to ignore this. It's only if you enjoy the content and you want to support me, that's absolutely fine. It's not a problem if you don't want to. I just thought it would be nice to be nominated for the first time ever. And if you wanted to do so, that would really mean the world to me. So if you could do that, and also if you could leave a like on the stream, again, that would be greatly appreciated. Enough plugging though. Let's go back to the questions. If there are any more questions you've got on your own team in the chat, then let me know and I'll try and answer all of the questions that come up. And I'll probably wrap up the stream in another 20 minutes, half an hour if there aren't many questions left in the chat. Until there aren't questions though, I'll probably keep going. So feel free to put them in the chat below and we'll have a discussion about it. Now, whilst we're here, another person I wanted to plug who's been given a lot of love in the last few hours, but I think really does deserve it, is FPL Meerkat. Now, FPL Meerkat did an absolutely unbelievable job of predicting the lineups for all 20 Premier League teams. There's a great thread here. It's on screen now. It's at FPL Meerkat. Oh, hang on. I've not got the full thing in the... Oh, dear. Oh, I've ruined it. Sorry, guys. There we go. So it's at FPL Meerkat on Twitter, or X if you want to call it that. I don't. But it's a great thread. He's got confidence on the prediction. He's got players to consider for FPL. And he's got all 20 teams listed here based on fan groups, based on a lot of the data as well, and analytical pieces. So yeah, great thread. I've used it over the last few hours. He's been getting a lot of love and built up quite the following in the last few hours, 13k now, but he certainly deserves it. So definitely do consider going and following him if you want to support him on that one. So back to my team. Also interesting, 7.5 million, actually that will be out of date as well, 7.5 million fantasy football managers at the moment, or yeah, around 7.5, which I think is quite high for this point. I think it rises quite quickly on deadline day, and I think we got up to around 10 million last season, so we could see a record. Let me know in the chat what you think we'll get to as well. A few more questions as well, which is good to see. So in the chat as well, Gordon versus Jota doing my head in. It's doing my head in as well, to be quite honest. Let's go across to here, and we'll go to where is it? Player comparison. We'll do a player comparison because I haven't done one of these in a little while. So we've got Jota and we've got Gordon. Okay, there we go. Is it going to work? Maybe not. Possibly not. That's annoying. Oh well. So we'll have a look on the FPL site instead. So Diogo Jota at 7.5 million is a minute's risk, to be quite frank. I think as it stands, it's a risk that I'm willing to take. The reason for that is because he's been getting good minutes in pre-season. Darwin and Gakpo especially look a couple of steps behind at least, and it definitely looked like the team against Sevilla last weekend was Arne Slot basically putting out his favoured 11 for game week 1 and testing them, and they obviously passed that with flying colours. I think they won 4-1. Jota looked electric, the team looked electric. I'd be very, very surprised if Jota didn't start game week 1. Obviously, that's against Ipswich away from home, so that's a great game week 1 fixture. And I think it's worth taking that chance on the minutes. I still think he'll get 65, 70 minutes. Now, we know from what Slot did at Feyenoord that he likes rotating all of his forwards, his wingers included in that, and therefore most of them will get 70 minutes a match. But it also means that if he's benched, he'll get the 20 minutes at the end as well, which down the line might be a thing. For now, though, I think I'd be quite confident in saying he at least starts the first couple of game weeks. And then around game week 3, maybe the international break, is when Darwin and Gakpo become real threats to that forward line. And therefore, I think he's probably not the best pick at that point. Until then, though, I think the upside is there. And because I'm not going with Salah, I do want to cover off the Liverpool attack a little bit. However, Gordon is the player that's giving me a lot of grief at the moment because I do think he starts. I do think he gets good minutes in game week 1, probably around the same as Jota, actually 70 minutes-ish, because he has had a short pre-season. But the underlying data is good, although not exceptional. It's not as good as Jota's, but he did average out at about 0.48 XG per 90 last season and has a great game week 1 fixture at home to Southampton, obviously. Then Bournemouth away, Spurs at home. I think, again, even though on paper it's not the best, Spurs defensively aren't the best. So Gordon at home, again, if we want to buy into that narrative, was very, very good. Let me just turn off Slack because it's getting a little bit annoying to have that coming up in the background. Don't know if you can hear it, but it is a bit annoying. So let's turn off notifications here. Cool. Oh no, not got the right one. Sorry, chat. This is a great deadline stream, isn't it? Okay, we'll mute that channel. Perfect. Right, that should shut up now. So Anthony Gordon, sorry about that. Great set of 5 fixtures to start off the season. I think even the home fixture against Spurs is absolutely fine, even though there's 2 home games there out of 5, and obviously he had great data and great returns against at home last season. I still think he's a good pick, and I think he's the better, more reliable pick than Jota over the opening 5. If I don't trust Jota's minutes after the first couple. Now, what I'm planning on doing at the moment is probably starting with Jota and taking that risk on the first couple of game weeks, and then as soon as there's a sniff that he's not locked in to start and Darwin and Gakpo are going to be taking considerable minutes off of him, which might even be game week 1. It might be after 60 minutes in game week 1, by the way. Then I'll make that transfer across to maybe Gordon or possibly Nkunku, or possibly whoever else comes out of the woodwork after game week 1. And I'm willing to not book in a transfer, but have that short-term horizon on Jota for the upside, knowing that it might be a move that I need to make in just a couple of weeks' time. Now, one thing I have considered is around game week 4 or 5, if Jota survives that long, to then swap him for Salah for a great home clash. I think it's against Bournemouth in game week 5. Yes, which will be a good captainable fixture, and downgrade Haaland to Watkins. So I could swap those 2 over with free transfers at that point if Jota lasts that long. Now, again, the reason I'm going for that strong front 8 is because if Jota does become a risk, then maybe I can roll the transfer 1 week, if it's game week 4 and I've only got 1 game week before I'm going to make that move anyway, then I could just save the transfer, start the other 7, and then I've rolled another transfer to make that move in game week 5. So that's another reason I've gone with extra depth here, to cover myself against those sort of problems. Let's have a look at more questions in the chat. So going with Murphy, a very good pick in game week 1. Let's have a look at his data. They do have 2 Murphys, so be a little bit careful there. But not great data, sorry, but decent returns, should be good on the minutes in game week 1. The reason I haven't gone with him to start with is because I think, first of all, they're quite publicly known for going for a right winger at the moment. They're in the market. So I think long term, he's questionable. Short term, obviously, very, very good upside. Southampton at home, Bournemouth away, Tottenham at home. Great 3 fixtures. And I think he'll probably start all 3 of those. But I also think he'll get taken off early, if not in game week 1, but probably by game week 2 and game week 3, because they do have options. They do have Gordon and Barnes to compete for minutes, and I don't think those 2 will share left wing alone. I think Barnes will also potentially take minutes off of Murphy eventually at right wing too. So I do like him. I wouldn't be putting anyone off of him whatsoever, and has looked very, very good in pre-season. But I think it's one of those picks that if you've got other risks in your 11, in your 15, then maybe Murphy is a risk too far. Maybe it's one that you might want to consider. So it all depends on the balance in your side. If you're fairly secure on the other 10, then Murphy makes a lot of sense, and you can have him for a couple of weeks before him becoming a bit more of a problem. But I personally prefer Minte and Smith Rowe for the longevity, and Minte's fixtures get really good after game week 4 as well. And Smith Rowe, as we know, has great fixtures pretty much from the off, if you count Man United in that. So Hall or Kwanzaa? Now, Kwanzaa is a player that's given me a lot of pause for thought recently. Let's have a look at Kwanzaa. So I think he's going to be a bit like Murphy, actually. He's going to be the starting player, or in the starting 11 come game week 1. Great fixture. And again, I'd be pretty surprised if he dropped out of the 11 before the international break. Although Man United, by that point, you might bench him anyway, but he might become more of a risk by that point. But the first 2 game weeks, I'd be surprised if he didn't start. He's a good ball-playing defender. We know that Slot rates that. And he's been playing in pre-season as well. And Konate hasn't, importantly. It is worth noting, though, that Konate isn't just a terrible player all of a sudden. He will get minutes at some point, and I do worry about Kwanzaa in the long term. I do think he's a great pickup, but I'm maybe slightly less bullish than the average manager on him. The reason, again, for that, in my team personally, might be because I've got Trent and Jota at the moment. If I didn't have Trent, I'd probably be much more tempted to go for Kwanzaa to cover off that Liverpool clean sheet. And again, it probably means that I've saved a bit of money there, so I can have extra depth too. So if I've got Trent, it probably means I'm not going to double up on the Liverpool defence. It seems like overexposure to me. But if I didn't have Trent, then I might be looking at Kwanzaa instead of Hall. That would be absolutely viable. For now, though, in my team, in my structure, I prefer Hall because of that balance and because of the upside from an attacking point of view as well. So that's my take on it, but I don't hate Kwanzaa whatsoever. I think he's a good pick too. Wood or Muniz? Now, I'm pretty set on Muniz. So the reason for that is I think he's got much stronger expected minutes and comparable data. Not better data. I think Wood comes out very slightly ahead of Muniz on the data in terms of XG per 90. But overall, Muniz I think is more secure for minutes. The reason I think that is because whilst Wood is first choice, I think he'll start the first 3 probably. I don't think that necessarily means he gets 90 in the first 3. Those first 3 are really good though. So Bournemouth, Southampton, Wolves are about as good as it gets really. So it's whether or not you think that the minutes are going to be good enough to reflect value. I think he'll probably get on average 70 minutes a game, but I think Muniz will probably get 85, 90 a game. And I think that difference probably makes up for the fact that Wood's fixtures in the opening few are slightly better and the data is slightly better per 90. Crucially, you need 90 to get that data. So I prefer Muniz out of the two for that security. But again, that's not saying Wood's a bad pick. I just think that we'll probably start seeing Awoniyi coming in and getting minutes off of him over the first few game weeks eventually. We've already seen that in pre-season as well. So I wouldn't be shocked to see that happen. So I would probably go with Muniz. But Wood has great upside too. So again, I'm not saying he's a bad pick, but I favour Muniz. Worried about Jota's fitness. Seems like he's injured a lot of the time, whereas Gordon is a fitness monster. Absolutely agreed. That's a really good point. And again, if I wanted to plan out a side for a longer term view, then Gordon would absolutely be in ahead of Jota. But because I'm probably planning a wildcard in game week 6, and I'm willing to even hit that wildcard in the international break after game week 3 if I want to, and if I feel like I need to, I can take a couple more risks on fitness and expected minutes. And I think Jota fits into that category quite nicely, where he's got the upside if he plays, and it's not going to hurt me too much if he comes out of the side quickly because of injury. I can at the end of the day just use a transfer if I want to bring in Gordon. So overall, I do prefer Gordon for the longevity, and it is still a move I could make before the deadline. I'm very 50-50 on this, probably 55 Jota to 45 Gordon as it stands. But it depends how you're setting up for a wild card. If you're planning in a wild card anywhere in the first 6 or 7 game weeks, then I'd probably eye up Jota as the upside pick. But if you're trying to look longer term and you're just trying to bring in players who are more secure and still good data, I think Gordon's the way to go. So it's based on your setup, basically. So Salah versus Bournemouth at home, bringing those flashbacks. Yeah, I captained him for that 9-0 as well. That was absolutely horrific. I was sat in, was it Battersea Park? I think it was Battersea Park. Very boring story. But I sat in Battersea Park updating and getting the ping notifications from LiveScore. Every 20 seconds, it seemed like, with another goal. I was like, oh, okay, I'll check these at the end. Salah must have got an absolute bag. I was having a great time. Checked who scored the goals at the end, and I just couldn't believe it. It was absolutely ridiculous. We'll never see anything quite like that again. Or I say that, but we also saw that with Havertz. I think it was 7-0 the other season, or 6-0, I can't remember. A lot of people captained him that game week. I think it was against Norwich. That was bad too. So these things do happen. It's been on the bad end of variance, and we're all on the bad end of variance at least once or twice a season. The important thing is to know that it is variance, it is luck at the end of the day, and hopefully it balances out come the end of the season. Another question in the chat: Eze and Trent, or Saka and Harwood-Bellis? Oof, tough one. Depends. I hate saying the word depends because it's a 50-50 question, but it does depend on how much other depth you've got on your side. If you're starting Harwood-Bellis week in, week out, then I think that's a problem. If he's sat last on your bench most weeks and you've got cover, so he's not fitting into your strongest 11, then I'd say possibly Saka is the better. It's the better combination to have Harwood-Bellis and Saka, because you've got a captainable option there, whereas Eze and Trent don't fit into that. Eze does have slight doubts with that transfer as well, and possibly has less upside than Saka. So I think overall, presuming that Harwood-Bellis is sat on your bench as your 5th defender, maybe even 4th, then I would say go with that. Otherwise, if Harwood-Bellis is starting in your 11 every single week, I'd probably go with Eze and Trent, just for that balance, just for that security. Veteran says, good luck, Pricey. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Good luck to you too. Not at Fest, son's birthday. Happy birthday to your son. That's great to hear. Wish him all the best. Hopefully you can get him watching these streams one day as well. But no pressure just yet. I don't know how old he is. Maybe when he comes of age, he can start watching and consuming FPL content. And hopefully beating us all at FPL. I'm sure he will soon enough. And yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, do remember to like the stream as well. That would be absolutely class. I'd really appreciate it if you could. Any other questions in the chat as well? If not, I will probably wrap up fairly soon. So let me know in the chat if there are any questions. I haven't even checked in to see how many people are actually watching the stream in quite a while. So let me have a look at that and see whether anyone's even still there. Wow, apparently 123 views so far. That's crazy. So thank you very much if you are viewing, if you are watching. 8 likes, so if we could boost those up to at least 10, that would be great. There's 18 of you watching live right now, so that would be great if you could. I don't rate teams, not in particular, because I think it gets a little bit complex, but because the chat is quiet, I wouldn't mind. I wouldn't mind it if you wanted to put it in the chat, and I can have a look at it overall if you wanted me to. I will make an exception because the chat's quite quiet today. Normally I wouldn't, but for you, go for it. If you give it a like, if you give the stream a like, I will do that. So yeah, absolutely. We're here, Manon. If you've got any questions as well, let me know. I will probably wrap up in the next 10 or 15 minutes. It's getting really hot in here as well. I need to sort out a fan that doesn't make too much noise on my streams. Let me know in the chat below as well how confident you are of getting off to a good start in FPL. Are you nervous? Are you anxious? Are you feeling good about it ahead of the deadline? What are your main dilemmas? Do let me know. And again, as we come back to it, I've kind of gone away from my side and I need to change it back. But let me know what you think of my team if you're new in the chat as well. This isn't the... Is this the team? Have I made the changes? No. Okay, this is the team. Lovely. So that's absolutely fine. Let me know what you think of this team at the moment. And actually, whilst we're here, would you start Smith Rowe away at Man United, or would you start Adam Armstrong away at Newcastle? On penalties, in Armstrong's case, but a tougher fixture, I think. And Smith Rowe, explosive, good underlying data against Man United, especially the Friday deadline as well. It's nice to have, and you shouldn't really think this way, but it is nice to have a bit of exposure on the Friday night kickoff, especially if you're going to Fest like I am. It would be nice to have a little bit of skin in the game. So yeah, overall, I think I might be more tempted to go with Smith Rowe to start, which will bring down my team rating slightly. Let's do that. Team rating is... No, I need to save it. Hang on. It's still 96. Okay, we'll take that. 96 seems pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Obviously, again, I've mentioned it on the stream already. Take it with a pinch of salt. But that is promising at the very least. So the combination of Smith Rowe, Minte, and Armstrong, I really like as a 3. Now, what that means is I start 2 of them every week. One of them is benched, obviously. Game week 1, let's say it's Minte and Smith Rowe to start. Game week 2, we can bring in Smith Rowe at home to Leicester quite easily. Now, I wouldn't say Minte's a bad pick at home to Man United by any means. If he looks electric in game week 1, then maybe I'm going to want to start him. But Smith Rowe at home to Leicester, Nottingham Forest at home for Armstrong on penalties. I think that's a great rotation. And we can even bring in Robinson, ahead of Hall, which I think looks really nice. So that gives me a game week rating of 94%. That seems really, really decent. Game week 3, we obviously probably want to bench Minte away at Arsenal, but luckily we've got Smith Rowe at home to away to Ipswich. Brentford away for Armstrong, not bad, not great, but also not bad. We could also start Robinson ahead of Hall, who has the home fixture against Tottenham. 91% team rating, pretty happy with that overall. Again, something's going to go wrong. There's no way that I get through all these weeks without having to make a transfer, but it's nice to look at on paper and say that it's going to go all right. Smith Rowe probably ahead of Armstrong here, although penalties not bad and is predicted more points than Smith Rowe here. But Ipswich at home for Minte, Smith Rowe at home to West Ham. It looks great. 94% team rating. Boom. Absolutely happy with that. And also can start Robinson ahead of Hall if I want to that week too. And then finally, in game week 5. Now, this is with a transfer booked in. I've made the transfers here. So the transfers would be Salah in for Saka in this instance, and Watkins in for Haaland. Captain Salah, and it gives me a decent team rating for that week as well. again, I can bring in Smith Rowe at home to Newcastle if I want to, but Minte and Armstrong both at home against Nottingham Forest and Ipswich respectively. I think that's absolutely fine too. I'm absolutely conscious that something will go wrong during these weeks, but I'm happy with my side every single week if nothing goes wrong. So it basically means I can roll transfers all the way through to game week 5 if nothing happens. Something will happen, so it means that I've not got anything booked in, and I can use transfers without taking hits if I absolutely need to around that point in time. Looking back at the chat, so Smith Rowe as United, yeah, so pick Smith Rowe in game week 1. I'll go back to game week 1 now. As United will give up more chances than Newcastle. Manon, I completely agree. That is probably the way I'm going to go as well. And from a selfish point of view, if Southampton score and Armstrong is on the end of it in game week 1, even if I've got him benched, I'm going to be really happy because I'm a Southampton fan. So I'm really happy to at least have him on my bench. And okay, someone might get rotated, injured, blah, blah, blah. He might come on anyway, but I'm still going to be happy anyway if he scores. And crucially, it means that I've not got the clean sheet wipeout, like I've not got the conflicting interest rather of Hall and Armstrong playing each other in game week 1 if I can possibly avoid it. I don't think that's a big problem to have, by the way, because at the end of the day, Hall can still score points even if they concede, but because I can avoid it, I want to do so. So Smith Rowe apparently is leaked to start. Oh no, sorry, read that wrong. False alarm, Dan. Sorry about that. If Smith Rowe is leaked to start, it's a win-win. Possible if Armstrong does, yeah. So I could swap it if he's not leaked to start. That's absolutely fine. But we'll hopefully get some heads up before the deadline. Dan is very nervous, worried about no Arsenal defence, but on a wildcard 6, so feel like he'd rather Gvardiol. Absolutely fair enough. I don't think Gvardiol is someone I'm willing to compromise on personally. I think the upside's there. There are good fixtures in 3 of the opening 5, and even in the other 2, you never know. He could pop up with something. I think he's got a lot more upside than a lot of the other picks at that price, and because I can cover off Raya in goal and cover off the clean sheet for just 1 million more rather than 1.5 million more than the 4.5s in defence, I quite like that. So, moving down, so Chad in the chat says that is a team, so that's a whole team. So Barco, Robinson, Trent, Hall, Porro, that sounds like a strong back 5. I really like it. Rodgers and Nkunku, Jota, Salah, Murphy. Again, pretty happy with that. Not really any complaints with any of those, to be honest. Murphy might be a short-term pick, but again, good upside there. João Pedro, Haaland, Isak, and Henderson, Valdemarson in goal. That's absolutely fine. That's a good front 3 as well. I've been not put off of João Pedro, but I think there's enough there that I think his minutes will be good, but possibly reduced ever so slightly because of the incoming signings they've got. So Rutter from Leeds is coming in by the looks of it. Let me know, by the way, if any transfer news happens in the chat as well whilst I'm on stream, because I'm kind of offline whilst this is happening. So if any news breaks, do let me know. I will have to fact check it though, because I'm aware that people might lie. Yeah, I think overall that's a good team. It's obviously not my team, and it's always easy for me to just fall into the trap of saying that team's not good because it's not the one I've picked. But I think overall there are risks there, but they've all got upside. I do like Rodgers, I do like Nkunku, I do like Murphy, I do like João Pedro. They're all within. I made a list of 27 players the other day that are within my consideration come game week 1, and they're all in that. So I don't think there's any outlandish, rogue, weird picks there. I think that's a good system. So yeah, overall, I'd probably give it an 8 out of 10 overall. So we'll have a look at Nkunku as well. So Tom asks, is Nkunku a must-have? No one's a must-have, I don't think. Definitely not Nkunku. I like him a lot. I'm a big fan, and I think he'll do really well this season if he stays fit, and there's no reason to think he wouldn't stay fit. But in my current system, I slightly prefer Eze and Jota. So again, it's only very slightly. If Eze is leaked to be off to Man City, if the clause is activated before the deadline, or if there's a strong rumour, then I've mentioned earlier on the chat that I would probably downgrade Eze for Nkunku. He's probably the next best pick that I'd have in my 5. But in terms of structure, I don't want to upgrade one of the 5.5s because it means I need to take $1 million out elsewhere. And I don't really want to downgrade another 7.5 in Jota because I think there are enough good options there that I want to be able to get across to Gordon, for instance, in one free transfer. The other thing is, in game week 1, Nkunku has Man City, whereas Jota has Ipswich. And I think Jota is almost nailed to start in game week 1. Now, if game week 1 comes and goes and Jota is then a risk, Nkunku's bad fixture is kind of out the way, and I can then make that swap in game week 2 as a worst case scenario. And I've had the best fixture for Jota, and I'm getting all the best fixtures out of Nkunku. Obviously, with the cost of a transfer, I don't want to book that in, but it is a worst case scenario on Jota that I'm willing to foresee and willing to plan for if I need to use it. It's kind of a break glass in emergency kind of issue. So Nkunku doesn't start the season for me, but he's by no means a bad pick, and I don't want to disregard him. He's definitely going to be in my thoughts for the first few game weeks. So, if Smith Rowe or Minte score in game week 1, can see a bandwagon building. I completely agree with that. I equally think if Smith Rowe, for whatever reason, doesn't get great minutes in game week 1, I think he will. But if he doesn't, then his ownership is now high enough that we might see a small drop. But I think the upside is massively there for them. They are the 2 players that I'm tipping to be bandwagons come game week 2, 3, 4. So yeah, I'm really enjoying seeing them in my team at the moment, even if there are very slight risks there. I've talked about it before though. I don't think they're massive risks. I think Smith Rowe is going to be one of the most important players in Fulham's system this season. His injury issues are or they seem like a thing of the past at the moment, and he's gotten good minutes in pre-season in that number 10 role. It looks like they've been building up his fitness too. I think he'll get very good minutes in game week 1. Not too worried about that. As a Brighton fan, starting to think Barco might be a trap. Now, that's an interesting one. So, even with Estupiñán not fit, Hertzler has been trying to get Baleba? Is it Baleba? Sorry, is it Baleba, let me know. I think it's Baleba. Playing in that position. Agreed. Barco could be an issue, and it's again someone that I'm maybe keeping an eye on, but from what I hear and from fairly reliable sources that I've been given, Estupiñán is still quite a way away. That I think they're targeting early October, from again what I hear, that he'll be back by, even if he is in training now. It's quite a long layoff that he's been victim to, that he's been subject to. So I think it will probably take a while to build him up. But then the question obviously comes into, is Barco even nailed without Estupiñán back fit? I think he's been good enough in pre-season and on corners. I don't think you give corners to a player in pre-season if you don't expect them to be on corners come game week 1, because why would you be testing that, especially with a new player and a new manager, or a relatively new player and a new manager? You're going to want to be using the correct players on set pieces, so you've got match day credibility and you're ready for game week 1, I suppose. So I think it would be pretty surprising if Barco didn't start game week 1. There is a risk there that he loses his place by the time the fixtures get good around game week 4. But honestly, he's last on my bench most game weeks. He is, for me, still the best, or taking the risk on his minutes is better as an option for me over the likes of Harwood-Bellis, Charlie Taylor, Johnson. Whilst Harwood-Bellis is nailed, the upside just isn't there, whereas Barco's upside, if he does nail down that spot, is huge, and he is an incredible talent. If any of you play Football Manager, which I do, he's one of the most signed players last season anyway, and in most of my saves, he ends up being absolutely world-class. Take that with a pinch of salt, obviously, because it is a game, but he is highly touted, and he's been playing really well in pre-season. He is absolutely quality from what I can tell and from the highlights I've watched. And I personally think he's... Well, you're the Brighton fan, you know better than me, but I think he's going to be okay, at least for the first 5 game weeks. And even if he's not, then he's sat 4th or 5th on my bench most weeks. Or sorry, he's sat 4th or 5th as a defender and last on my bench most weeks anyway. So I'm not too concerned. And I think it's a low risk position. If you're planning on starting him every week, then I'd be much more concerned. And I'd also worry that you've got 3 4.0s potentially. That could be problematic in itself. Okay, so let's have a look in the chat again. So which players should we look to for price rises and falls? It's hard to tell at the start of the season, but I do back Minte to get off to a hot start, and I think he's underpriced. Rodgers as well, I think, is potentially underpriced, but the ownership on Rodgers is a bit higher, so that also leaves him susceptible to a price drop. I've got a sneaky feeling about Bruno Fernandes as well. He's on penalties, the minutes are good, and the fixtures are not as bad as people are saying. So if I bring him up, so Fulham, Brighton, Liverpool, Southampton, Palace, Spurs, they're not that bad, and his ownership's only 18%. I think he underperformed on his underlying data last season quite considerably. I think he could be a sneaky little bandwagon. I think he could be a player that maybe gets a couple of price rises in the opening few game weeks. If he pops off in game week 1, I could definitely see that happening, but that is a big if. Hall as well, I think, is being maybe treated with a little bit of caution at the moment, but Newcastle fans are absolutely adamant that he should be the left back of choice this season. If they're correct, he could be a player that rises quite quickly because his ownership, I don't believe, is very high, 4.2% and good fixtures. So I think he could be a bandwagon potentially, but if the question is, should I be buying or should I have players based on the likelihood of them getting a price rise, I would say no. I've tried that before. It doesn't usually work out very well. It almost always leads you down a path of taking too many risks on minutes. And trying basically to hit too many bullseyes, and you're not going to hit them all. You might get 1 or 2, but I think the best way to build team value is just pick the players you think are going to score the most points. At the end of the day, there's a very, very high correlation between players that score points and the players that get the price rises, because managers are going to flock to the players scoring the points. So if you just bring in the players that, if you keep it simple, buy the players that you think are going to score the points in the opening few game weeks, it's quite likely that they're the ones that are going to get the rises in value in the first few game weeks too. There will be the odd bandwagon that is being really overlooked. Let's say Minte, for argument's sake, that will get a lot of price rises very quickly if they go off or if they overperform based on what other people think. That could be a real bandwagon and rise in price maybe 3 or 4 times in the opening couple of game weeks. But those are hard to predict in advance. So I wouldn't pick a player based on that assumption. I'm picking Minte because I genuinely think he's going to be a breakout star. And if I'm right, then I'm going to be one of the first people to own him, and therefore I'll get all the benefit of the points. I will also get the benefit of the price rises, but also I've got him ahead of the good fixture turn in game week 4 as well. So, and also, yeah, as Manon says in the chat, how bad could it possibly go with a 5.5 million player? It's a low risk position. I've got 8 strong attackers, and I can downgrade him to a Rodgers or even a 4.5 million midfielder very easily if I want to. So, yeah, in summary, I wouldn't be targeting players for price rises alone, but just pick the players you think are going to score the most points, and they're probably going to be the ones that, if you're right on those assumptions, they're the ones that will rise in price more often than not anyway. Okay, so what are your thoughts about Pedro and Barco? Already talked about Barco. Pedro, I've talked about a little bit. I think he's still a starter. I'm just not sure that he's going to get incredible minutes every single week. I think that over time he could become a 70-minute man more often than not, and therefore for me is possibly too risky to start with. But I could easily swap Pedro and Pedro and Armstrong with Minte and Brereton Diaz, basically. So that is a way I could play it. But I think with Rutter coming in, they've got so many midfielders and attackers. Now Ferguson as well is going to be a factor at times too. I just think that there's just so much so much potential there for early substitutions or rotation. And there is for Minte too, by the way. That, like, Minte is a risk, but I just think he's looked so good in pre-season and he comes so highly rated that I'm willing to take that risk on him. And I'm also willing to be wrong. I'm willing for that to go badly and then for me to just go across to Rodgers in game week 3 or 4 if things go really, really badly. I don't think they will, but I think it's easier to escape Minte because there are options beneath him at price point than with João Pedro. Because let's say João Pedro does get rotated a couple of times in the opening few game weeks, he'll get a price drop. He'll go down to 5.4 very, very quickly. And under 5.4, there's no one really. There's maybe Archer at 5 million if he goes to Southampton, maybe a 4.5 in Jebison, but they're signing a striker at the moment by the looks of it anyway. So basically, if you have Pedro on your side and he drops in price, you're kind of stuck until you free up money elsewhere, or you've got 0.5 in the bank from the start of the season. So that's why I'd be slightly more worried about Pedro now than a Minte, for instance. Armstrong as well is low owned. I think a price drop is very unlikely. Good fixtures on penalties. I think actually he could be a bit of a bandwagon as well. If he gets a couple of goals in the first couple of game weeks, all it takes is a couple of penalty goals and all of a sudden he's a bandwagon as well. And I think he's much more likely to get a price rise than a price fall, in my opinion. So hopefully that resolves the thoughts on Brighton assets for now. Thanks for the comments. Thank you, Jara. Quite reassuring. Might start the season with him. Yeah, okay. I think we're kind of up to date on the questions at the moment. So I'll probably wrap up the stream in a couple of minutes. If you guys have got any more questions, final questions, or just want to say hi in the chat before I wrap up, please do so now. One final push as well for likes, and if you want to subscribe as well, that would be greatly appreciated. But if we could get to 15, 20 likes on the stream, I would absolutely love that. It would mean the world to me. And before we wrap up as well, I did want to say, I think I said it at the start, but a huge, huge thank you to any of you that have watched any of my preseason content this year. I've put in so many hours in the first few weeks of preseason. I think 13 or 14 videos in the space of 30 days. So it's a video every other day, I think. And honestly, the hard work has really paid off for me because you guys have made it so positive, and you've given me quite a lot more views than I was expecting as well. Over 1,000 views on most of the videos. So yeah, all I can say is thank you so much. I've really appreciated the support, and hopefully I can repay that faith over the season with good advice, and hopefully today I've done that as well. Arguably it's terrible advice and I'm going to ruin all of our drafts, but I hope it's not that bad. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much. And a final push as well in the comments, in the description, if any of you have a couple of minutes spare, and it really does only take a couple of minutes, there's a link to the Fantasy Content Awards. If any of you wanted to nominate me in the Fantasy Football Content Creators category, that would be absolutely amazing. I'd really appreciate that as well. It is one of my aims for this year, just to get a nomination in the Fantasy Content Awards. That would be amazing. I'm not expected to win anything, really not, because there are huge creators out there who will get thousands of votes. I might only get 1 or 2, but just to even be in that conversation would be incredible. So thank you in advance if any of you wanted to do so. I would be forever grateful, and definitely owe you a pint if we ever met up in person. For now, though, I think we're probably done for the time being. People saying thank you in the chat, so thank you very much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Do make sure you subscribe before the start of the season. I will post my final team on X, Twitter, whatever, over at FPL Pricey. So that's just at FPL Pricey, all one word. Again, it's just above me. I always forget that it's on there. Do follow me on Twitter. I'm very active on there, and I will post my locked draft because, again, things could change. I am about to go drinking at Fest, so you never know what it's going to end up looking like. But I do think that I'm very close to locking in with this. Diogo Jota is the big question mark at the moment. Whether I go safe with Gordon or go for Diogo Jota is probably the question here. But I'm pretty happy with the draft. So yeah, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate all of the support. For now, though, good luck in game week 1. I really hope you have a fantastic start to the season. Remember to enjoy it. It is just a game. There is always room for a fun pick in there as well. Minte's mine. I don't know what yours is, but I'm sure it's going to be incredible as well. In the meantime, though, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you as I start preparing for game week 2 on probably Sunday evening, maybe Monday morning, with fresh content, probably a watch list, probably a game week preview, and then, of course, a team selection as well towards the end of the week. For now, though, goodbye and good luck again in game week 1.